It's good to see you.
Okay. All right, I think we're ready. I think we can get started. So you want to kick us off, standing? And I may be checking the recording. There was one time where it didn't record, so we're gonna maybe get it. If you're ready, we're gonna go ahead and get started. So you can still go get donuts and coffee as needed.
Well, good morning, everybody. I have the distinct privilege and honor to introduce my friend and colleague, Reverend Casey Carbone. I met Casey pre-pandemic and under circumstances that are far, far away from PCM. We both served on a synod committee, let's just say, for churches that are in trouble. And so that's the reason why I say far, far away from PCM's circles. And if we both survived that committee, and you're off now, and I'm off now, but our friendship and relationship continues. Casey, in his day job, serves as Director of Congregational Connection in the Presbyterian of Hudson River. And in this role, he works on nurturing leadership development and helps cultivate innovative tools and strategies that empower individuals and communities to thrive in their unique ministry concepts. And also, he has a active blog through the Substack format. And oh my gosh, 4 months ago or so, I found this particular blog entry to be most interesting. So I asked him to, if he would be willing to come to PCM and present it to us. So, without any further ado, introduce Reverend Casey Carbone.
Great, thank you. Great to be here this morning with all of you on this gorgeous Sunday morning. Couldn't have asked for a better Sunday. As we go throughout the course of time, I have some slides, I have some pieces that open it up to discussion with some questions, but I'm very flexible. So if you have questions or you want to ask something along the way, feel free to raise your hand and we'll have a conversation. Craig did a great job with the introduction, and I hate writing any kind of introduction about myself, but if you're more curious about anything, I did my BA in religion psychology at Calvin College, now Calvin University. Oh, okay. And I did my MDiv back here in New Jersey at Princeton Theological Seminary. As Craig said, I love working with our 70 some odd congregations in Hudson River Presbyterian, and I work with some amazing people there. And I have the pleasure of working on some new and innovative tools. One of the most recent projects I worked on was something called Polity Pal for our Presbyterian, and using the power of AI, helping to create a tool for pastors and elders and other folks in our Presbyterian. If they had questions about polity or about any of the Presbyterian procedures, they could ask it and it would give it a good answer. And I have never seen anyone more excited about Presbyterian polity than our polity system, so that's, it really wanted to emphasize that. But when I'm not working on all this, I do have an interest in what we're talking about today, which is we're talking about how we as people of faith navigate the world around us and all of this information that we consume, especially I think as it feels that it is just a never-ending stream of information and news that we're taking in. So over the course of our time together, I think there's sort of 3 topics, or 3 main points that I want us to sort of focus on, which is one, just spending some time recognizing the toll that media overload or our constant consumption of media has had on us and the impact it's had on our health. I want to talk a bit more about how we as people can develop some more core foundational skills for discerning what it is we're taking in, and then considering our responsibility as people of faith, because I think In all of this, we do have a responsibility as disciples to respond faithfully. I was lamenting to our State Clerk, who is one of the wonderful people I work with recently, about how it feels like no one seems to be paying attention anymore. I love all the folks in our Presbytery, and I'm sure some of the folks who do planning stuff here at PCM, you send out what feels like 7, 8, 9, 10 emails about an upcoming event, and it feels like someone still reaches out and asks you that question about what day is it going to be on the event, or what time, do I need to bring anything? And I was just like, it feels like we send out all this information about stuff that's coming up, and we have this great conversation about, well, there's a lot going on, and so perhaps that has contributed to perhaps this sense of distraction or this sense of disconnectedness from perhaps things that, well, I guess I'm biased. Presbyterian events are a priority for me, but perhaps they're not so much for everyone else. But I think there is this recognition, though, of there is this overload that we're experiencing, and whether or not you're familiar with him, perhaps you are, a 19th century philosopher by the name of Soren Kierkegaard really sort of muses a little bit about this idea of media and news. He poses this interesting idea of, imagine that there was this tube that was really convenient for spreading out all this information, and how perhaps it might unsettle us all, and what if we regulated that like we would any other kind of weapon or thing like that? Perhaps, whether or not you would agree with him, I think you might recognize, though, that perhaps we have become a bit unsettled in our world right now and in our communities as we take in everything around us. A study that was put out by the Associated Press found that at least 65% of adults reported feeling overwhelmed just by the sheer amount of news consumption that they take in, not even including any of the other types of media that they take in, but just news alone. Their survey found 65% of adults feel overwhelmed. And I think for myself as a millennial, I think there's truth in that, and I'm going to make some broad generalizations thinking about myself growing up to where we are now, where I think back in the day, sort of remembering back perhaps through rose-tinted glasses, it felt like news was slower. Even for myself, as a millennial in their 30s, I grew up having a flip phone cell phone, so it's not like I was getting Apple News alerts or New York Times app alerts on my phone. I had to watch the television or turn to a paper, or if no one else was using the internet, try and log on and see what else was going on. Compared to now, where you have social media, you have all these constant news notifications that go on. Especially now, as we look at recent events, regardless, including the wars in Ukraine and the ongoing conflict in Palestine, we see studies now talking about how, young people first learned about what happened in Utah, not necessarily from news sources, but they just saw it pop up on their phone with no added context or no added other information, but it's just this nonstop barrage content. I think people back in the day, and perhaps there were other alternative news sources, but it felt like there was more sense of a common news sources that were shared. I mean, I think growing up again, remember CNN, Fox, MSNBC, and there wasn't necessarily these kinds of this wide variety of sources that we have today, which seem to really focus more on some of our more partisan, what I would call, takes, which really help divide these wedges between people and communities by catering what news they're putting out to certain groups of people. I think back in the day also, again, right or wrong, it's my very vague general feeling, though, that it felt as though news back then had this more civic responsibility and sense of integrity about conveying just the facts of what was happening. Versus now, it feels like, especially again with social media and with these computers that we carry in our pockets, news corporations care more about how they can get your attention via news, whether it be catchy titles or graphics, they want you to spend more time on their platform, which generates more income. I'm not going to talk about the book today, but it is a really interesting read, thinking about this shift, especially in our attention and how we consume news. There's a great book called The Siren Song, which I read recently by Chris Hayes, which talks about the economy of attention and how attention is perhaps the most limited, finite resource of our day. And it just, I think, helps us sort of frame perhaps more where it is we're spending our attention, especially as we carry on. I think these shifts, though, looking at how media or news has been versus now, I think we see this play out as we saw also in the survey where people were feeling overwhelmed and just the negative impact that it's had on us. According to the American Psychological Association, I think there's obvious negative impacts on our mental health, whether it be people feeling this increased sense of anger or anxiety. They feel as though there's more intrusive thoughts about the news coming in their heads. Perhaps it's harder to separate what they hear on the news versus just going about their daily lives. Perhaps for some folks it means that everything that they're consuming leads them to experience depression as well. Also has negative impacts on our physical health, a decrease in self-care, or as the APA also notes, the increased tendency for people to try and self-medicate this stress that they're feeling, whether it be through drinking or other substances, just trying to self-medicate, again, whatever it is they are feeling. They also note, again, the societal health, the negative impacts on that, again, a sense of tribalism, as we looked back before, how news media outlets are catering news to certain groups of people, again, enforcing this us versus them, and for some people, it might even look like just stepping back and withdrawing altogether. Now, this was not in the APA study, but I think there's negative impacts on our spiritual health also, whether it be we don't allow moments for additional time and reflection or devotion, whether it be this disturbance of a sense of our inner lack of peace or a disconnection perhaps from what we hear or what we read in the gospel versus what it is we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis just because of everything we're taking in. So I think there are definite negative impacts when we look at the toll of our sort of overconsumption of media. So we've seen the negative impact that media has had, or at least what I think are a lot of the negative impacts that this overload of media has had on people. And so I think I want to shift and transition into talking a little bit more about discernment. If we know that overconsumption of news can have negative impacts on us, well, perhaps we can do something about that. And one of my favorite Greek philosophers, Socrates, has this wonderful quote at the end of this dialogue where he says that wisdom begins with wonder. I don't know how many of us do wonder, or I wonder how many of us ask questions that lead us to wisdom or lead us to truth when we see that clickbait title pop up in our newsfeed, or that headline that comes from a reputable news source, but it's catchy, and we'll click share without even deciding to read what's in the article, or we just click before we even discern whether it's actually real human generated or perhaps it was AI generated. But I think that's important for us as we think about all the impacts that our media consumption has on us. Are we making room for that sense of discernment for us as well? And as we think about discernment, I think there's a few misconceptions or biases that I want to sort of dispel, which is this issue of discernment's not limited to conservatives, it's not limited to liberals, doesn't matter what party you belong to, or whatever kind of other ideological beliefs you might have. The discernment, or the lack of discernment, that we find in today's sort of media culture is something that's pervasive. I have to just sometimes ignore what I see on my Facebook feed and withhold any sense of snarky comment for myself, because friends who are on both sides will just share things without any kind of check as to whether or not it's real sometimes. This also is an issue that's about whether you're young or you're old. I think there are in the media, especially how they curate some of these things, that do target certain demographics, but the issue of how we discern what's actually going on is not something that's just limited to your age. It's also not limited to the level of education you have. I know some really smart people who've done some amazing programs, and yet again, I'll scroll through my newsfeed and I'll see these clickbait things people share, and I have to think of a very loving way to say, oh, like, have you looked at what? But it's not limited based on even the level of education you have, and it's not limited to your technical ability. I am someone who loves technology, computers, but and I know a lot of people who share similar skills, but the issue of discernment is also not limited to whether you're a tech-savvy person or not. So those are just some of the things I wanted to get out of the way. I think as we dispel some of these perhaps misconceptions or generalizations we make about people in terms of how we discern everything that's going on around us in the news and the media that we're consuming, I did not go to school for journalism, but I find that it's helpful to begin thinking about discernment through the lens of the 5 core values of journalism, and their names different things depending on, but it seems I have here is the more well-known ones, or seem to be commonly shared. And so thinking about what it is we're consuming through the lens of truth and accuracy. I don't think we can always guarantee that we're always going to touch on the truth 100% of the time, and I think that's where humility comes into play, to admit when we made a mistake or we didn't get something right. But we should be striving in terms of whatever it is we share or whatever it is we consume, to see if we can get as close as we can to truth. My favorite sort of line in a show that I watched growing up, The West Wing, one of the speech writers, they're working on this speech, and he's like, I don't want to use the stat unless I have 3 different sources to back it up. And so we want to try and approach what it is we consume, what we share, with that mindset of pursuing truth. We also want to try and think about independence in terms of what we consume and what we share. I know, lots of media outlets are going to have a skew, perhaps even the ones that are most center are going to have some kind of skew, and you can actually be too neutral in reporting the news, because then you try to distort things to be neutral. But it's all to reinforce the fact, though, that we should be conscious, should be aware of where people are coming from, and to avoid the kind of echo chamber of what it is we're consuming. Fairness and partiality, thinking about, again, what we consume. I think there's a difference between being fair and then perhaps giving weight to an argument that's not, perhaps doesn't hold weight, but we should try to be fair, try to be impartial in terms of what it is we consume. Also, trying to remember, especially I think that's important for us as people of faith, to remain grounded in the humanity of it. If we're going to profess that we are all created in the image of God, how we process the events that go on around us, I think that should also play a role. And then accountability, I think that goes back to the truth and accuracy a little bit that I said. If we make a mistake because we're not perfect, we admit that, and we try to do better in terms of how we discern, again, learning these skills and honing them as we go on. I think I would just stop here to ask, as we think about these skills about discernment, as you think about how you consume the news, whether that is on your smartphone or TV or your phone, whatever that may be, are there any examples that come to mind, perhaps, of things that have popped up recently for you, where you had questions about what it was you were seeing.
It was about 2 weeks ago, and now I have an Apple computer. I like to think I'm very cautious, and I was on Safari, typed in Google, because I just wanted. And everything that came up talked about a huge data breach in Google affecting like 1 billion people, and you should all change your password. And it wasn't true, but it was like listing all these different places that had articles. And I was like, that's AI, I guess, somebody went berserk. But it was like, it looked so real.
Yeah.
And it had legitimate news sources.
I saw the same one, and I was
I was like, oh no, I was freaking out. It's like I wasn't on the computer for 2 days and now this is happening. And it
Yeah.
wasn't legit.
Anyone else?
I don't even know how this ties in, but I have a flip phone, and I love it.
Yeah.
And I don't want anyone to praise me. I'm not trying to hold myself. I'm not exemplary, but I feel like a freak. I feel sometimes embarrassed, often, even on borderline ashamed. There's things that I can't open that people send me. I feel foolish. But I've steadfastly refused. People who know me well, who love me, my family, they're like, you've got to, you know, it's inevitable, Dad. And I just keep holding my ground, and I'm just increasingly glad. I don't want the internet. I say I don't want it in my pocket. Is it inconvenient sometimes not to have it there? Yeah. When I need to know the hours of a restaurant or do something. But I don't know what it's like to be on the other side, but all I'm saying is I'm very gratified that I'm taking what is an uncommon or unpopular view, have the courage to follow that. I don't know what Facebook is. I don't know how to access it. I don't know where it is. I don't really know what it is. I don't understand how it works. I don't understand what it means to be liked or followed. All I know is I don't want to be followed. I don't. I want the people in my life, I want them to be select and few. That's the way I've always felt. I don't want to be in the crowd.
Yeah,
I want to be on the periphery.
Yeah.
And I feel safer there.
And I don't know if it's still a true trend, but I remember reading recently about Gen Z, I think it was Gen Z, how some of them were starting to buy just flip phones. Because they, you know, you didn't have
but
that.
I don't want to be,
Snapchat
but
or-
see, people, like, they say, oh, I admire you, like, for your stand. Well, I don't want you to admire me. I just want you to accept and understand that there are some smart and reasonable people who make a choice to do that. I don't want anyone to laud me and say, oh, wow, you know, you're really incredible. It's not about that.
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem I see today with the media and in general with people who speak to the media is truth has gone away in a lot of instances. In that, I was listening to the governor of Utah make some comments after the shooting, the Charlie Kirk shooting, and I thought they were such well-spoken, proper sentiment about the sorrow and pulling together. And it's not the world we want to live in, where people disagree and so they shoot you. And I think we live in a world now where, particularly among politicians, they feel they can say mistruths, and if they just say them often enough, they'll become truth. And it's happening all over. I don't think there's veracity to a lot of the comments that come out of government today. And I think that's very sad, because I think it contributes to the polarization, the extreme polarization we're living in.
And then to your point, all that is going on, and this makes it come at us at lightning speed.
Lightning speed, a lot of it,
Yeah,
and there's not time to discern.
like high tide all the time.
An incredible lack of humanity, and that's because of the polarization. And it's us versus them, and, you listen to the news and you see the pictures of Gaza, and you see the horrific things going on, and there's the lack of humanity in reporting those things in many instances.
You have your hand up?
This is impossible. True journalism is impossible for me to do. And so I just as soon not look, and then that's bad too, because then I put my head in the sand, so I'm frustrated.
What's wrong with that?
Well, it's a...
But there's a difference between putting your head in the sand out of ignorance
No.
and putting your head in the sand out of choice.
Yeah.
It can be a smart choice.
But is there a question when I see something, one question that I can look at before I accept it and pass it on or discuss it with others? Maybe it is, am I human? Am I kind to pass this on or something like that? I don't know. I just need something.
Those are good
simple.
questions, and I think I'll touch on that as we go on, but that's a good question. You all named some great things also, and I'm just going to give some more examples of things that I think we encounter. After the election of Pope Leo, for example, I saw this, you don't have to be able to read the whole thing, but it was this quote that was supposedly said by Pope Leo about, how we're called to be awake, to be woke. A very popular photo that went around on Facebook, but if you spent a few minutes researching the quote, and even Pope Leo or Robert Provost, it wasn't something he actually said. But it's just something, again, it's one of those things that if you see it, and it's if it's something that resonates to you, you share it, but it's something that's apocryphal in terms of the kind of information that we have on Facebook.
Was it consistent with something he believed or not?
Well, I think that's another question, right? I think you could, I don't know Robert Provost well enough or Pope Leo well enough to know whether it's something that is more of an amalgamation of stuff he said. I guess my greater concern is I still wouldn't want to attribute it to someone as if it was an actual quote. I think there's a difference between saying what I think you're saying is what the ideas that you had versus a quote, and I think that's an important distinction that you raised. I think again, some of the other stuff you mentioned about AI generation these days. This report from NBC came out, and on the right here you have an actual news clip, and then they take the same news clip and using AI they generate something that looks seemingly just as real, and they even mimic the camera movements as if it was a real person moving the camera and zooming in, zooming out. And again, we have fake news that spreads rapidly thanks to the technology we have. It wasn't too long ago that you saw reports that apparently the president was dead, and it was a persistent rumor online until he made an appearance. And especially now, again, building on some of the stuff that's happened in recent events, we find sort of this combination of the two. Lots of AI now is generating books apparently about Charlie Kirk that's making its way onto the internet, but again, not grounded in anything that's grounded in our sense of reality. So these are, I think we encounter these kind of things even if we're not online as often as we might think we are. We encounter these on various levels. And I do want to take a little bit of a detour, since this is an area I'm interested in terms of AI, just to talk a little bit about AI, especially how easy it is nowadays to use AI. the one I think that most people have heard of is ChatGPT. And the GPT actually stands for something as well as the chat. Chat just means that's how you interface with it. The G stands for generative. It means it's going to take whatever idea you put into it, and it's going to use whatever information you feed into it. It's going to combine that with any of the pre-training that it has. So any of the information that it's been trained on, and it's going to take all these things and transform it and make something new, basically, based off of what you put in.
So one of the things I've discovered about AI, it depends on your question. And if you ask the question a certain way, you'll get certain output. If you change it, you'll get other output, and you don't know what is real.
Yeah. What I tell people a lot in terms of even the polity tool that I made for folks that uses AI, the quality of the answer that it gives you is going to be completely dependent on the quality of text that you put in. If you just put in a lazy answer or a question, it's going to give you a lazy answer. So but in order to show you though, I think especially sort of to speak to what your point also, how easy it is to generate content that can be misleading. I went to ChatGPT and I just asked it to generate a picture of a flooded coastline in North Carolina with a caption, NBC logo, and to add a location to the news. And this is the picture that it generated. It has the NBC logo, flooded coastline, Wilmington, North Carolina. I want to ask you though, I told you though that I generated this, so you know that. But looking at this picture, is there anything at first glance that would make you think this is fake? Okay, so I'm going to walk you through some skills then for things that you can keep an eye on. Okay. I highlighted several things. One, if you were looking on your phone or computer, the texture of this house is too smooth. It's almost too perfect. It looks almost painting-like. The textures are just too smooth. The power lines, these are perfectly spaced out power lines. Along the same line of these power lines, these other cables that come out from them, they are really blurry, and then sometimes, like in this instance, they just sort of trail off into nothingness. You also have here water that's pretty still, relatively speaking, compared to the storm surge that's happening right over there. And then lastly, you have this weird bit of architecture on this house with the porch where it seems like, yeah, it's a normal porch, but then the roof just sort of curves up. But I think as you sort of see though, you can find an image, just a still image online that can be very easily generated. I could ask it to generate a picture from Gaza or Ukraine or, Morristown, and ask it to, generate whatever I want it to. And especially if I feed it pictures of those places, it'll generate it.
But how often is John Q. Citizen going to take the time to do the analysis that you just did?
Well, that's where you come in.
Uh-oh.
But
ChatGPT is you're typing in and talking to AI? Is that what it is? Okay.
yeah, so that's basically what ChatGPT is. It's this text-based interface where you go back with AI or with OpenAI's software, which again is how I can give it this simple prompt of, and that's a very bare minimum prompt. I could feed it more information if I wanted to, but it's able to generate something like this though, which I think is important for you though here as you begin to, consider how you take in what you see on social media. I mean, the thing is, even major news outlets are susceptible to falling for fake created content on AI, which I think is again all the more important for people like all of us we don't have to be experts, but we should ask the questions, I think, as to whether or not it's real. And if we begin to sort of attune ourselves to, what to look out for in terms of textures, if something seems too perfect, a lot of AI still is not great with body parts, like your hands and stuff like that. So just to, be mindful of things that look abnormal, like even in this stormy picture, there's things that if you really spent some time, spend a few moments looking at it, you'd be able to identify that something just feels a little off about the scene. That sort of leads to some, I think, I don't expect you all to be AI experts at discerning these things, but I think there's things out there, tools out there that help you discern, you know, everything that it is we're taking in. And I think one of my favorite ones growing up was Snopes.com, great news site in terms of reporting on things that you might often hear on the internet or even things on cable news, and it will tell you, you know, they have a pretty good track record in terms of breaking down misinformation. Another great one that's run out of a nonprofit, factcheck.org, another one that tries to balance everything that we're taking in and to try and help increase public knowledge and understanding. And the last one's not so much about news checking, but a favorite site of mine just because of the vast materials that it puts out is newslit.org, or the News Literacy Project. Is a great site that puts out materials that help you think about what's coming out, but then they also have some great materials that, you know, will help point you about AI, the use of AI now especially. They have some great articles on there. And I can make these slides accessible to Craig, and Craig can share them with you all also, so nothing here is proprietary. You know, just to give you a little sample of what these sites look like, you know, Snopes will break down some of the popular news articles that they have. Same thing with factcheck.org will break down. And similarly, the News Literacy Project will try to break down pieces of media as well.
So if you look at those things, we don't have to ask a question, it'll just, that what they're stating is actually true? Do we have to ask questions, or you just?
I think we should always ask questions,
How do you
right?
but how do you use it?
Oh, so you should be able to go, for example, like Snopes.com, you should be able to just go to that website, and if it's something you think is really circulating on the internet, it'll either be on the home page or you can search topic-wise in the search bar.
Okay.
And if perhaps you don't see anything related to what you're searching, perhaps it hasn't made a big enough rounds yet in terms of.
I find in my use of AI, I need to ask a question in several different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a silly example, but we have a birthday cake we wanted to freeze. So I asked AI, well, how do you freeze a birthday cake? And it said, well, you got to slice it up into little slice pieces, and then you freeze each piece. And I thought, that's a lot of work. So I said, well, how do you freeze a frosted layer cake? Got a completely different answer. So very subtle changes in how you ask the question give you very different results. And as you begin asking these various questions, you start getting at a kernel of truth. But you have to be persistent.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the struggle for us will be as AI keeps evolving, even still with the latest model, ChatGPT 5, it's still not the best. You know, I'll ask it to try and find sources on something, and it'll sort of do, Mickey, what you mentioned is, it will say that so-and-so said this in this book, but I own the book and I go look it up, I look to find the pages on, and it's not there. And it said, and I'll push back on it and say, well, you made that up. And it says, yeah, I did, but it's something that, you know, sounds like them, you know, and like, oh, it's an amalgamation of what they said. So there's, you know, and it's the same problem that early on Google ran into with Gemini. I don't know if you remember, you know, the famous incident I think of. You know, if you make pizza, you add glue as one of the ingredients. You would never add glue to pizza, but you know, AI again in the early stages of infancy then, but it's getting better and better and better. I think as we think about these tools, there's more great options out there, but these are three that really pop up for me in terms of how I think about discerning what's out there, or ones that I immediately turn to if something seems questionable. Is I think thinking about the responsibility that we have as people of faith, our Christian responsibility. You know, this favorite passage of mine from Paul from 1 Corinthians, this idea, you know, we look through a mirror darkly, or as it sees there, for now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. If we hone these skills for discerning what it is we're taking in, I have to imagine there's some kind of implication for us as people of faith. I think part of that is establishing a practice of Sabbath. You know, we practice Sabbath, perhaps this Sunday morning's your Sabbath, or you have other examples of mini Sabbaths throughout the week. But changing what it is we tell ourselves about what's going on into shaping it then into a more sustaining Sabbath practice for us. You know, I think we often hear that being informed means constantly being plugged in. That, you know, if we're somehow not always aware of every little thing that goes on, then we're not informed. But in reality, we can set boundaries for ourselves. We can choose to say, I'm not going to consume every bit of news that comes in. I'm not going to pay attention to every alert that comes in on my phone. I'm going to set boundaries for myself, and I'm going to choose a few reliable sources that I find reliable, and that's going to be what I consume. You know, for myself, you know, I love, there's a lot of people who I love who they just nonstop, they're on their phones or they're on their computers taking everything and that's in, and they ask me what I do. And I listen to my morning NPR podcast in the morning, that sets my day, and then maybe at night I'll scroll through a couple different paper subscriptions that I have. But I cannot live chronically on my phone. I cannot chronically live online. I mean, it would just do terrible things for my health. I think we also tell ourselves that, or what we sometimes hear, depending on where we fall, that the news does paint this complete picture of everything that's going on. But we know, though, that even news sources, even reliable ones, don't always provide the whole picture. So we do need to, at times, look at other sources in order to paint that more complete picture for ourselves. I think we often also hear how, like other aspects of our lives, we can choose when and how much we participate in consuming the news. And I don't know why I had the same thing twice, but I think what I'm trying to get at is, I think I meant over here is, I think we often hear that in order to be a good citizen or a good, community member, we always need to be informed, but that's not the case, that we can choose to participate and how we participate. So if we take these sort of, the reality of what it is in terms of establishing a Sabbath practice for ourselves, how do we redeem that and turn that into something that's actionable for us? If we can set boundaries for ourselves and select what it is we consume, we can also choose to limit what we consume and to choose to rest and to take action that makes a difference in the world instead of just being bombarded with everything that says that the world's falling apart. I think, as we said before, news sources, even reliable ones, don't always paint the whole picture. So we can utilize our tools of discernment to help us paint a picture for ourselves and to paint pictures for other people. As uncomfortable as that might be, it might, if I see Craig post something online, I might have to, in a loving way, comment and say, "Oh, Craig, have you looked at this, or have you checked out the source of where this came from?" As uncomfortable as that might make me, it helps paint a more complete and real picture for Craig. And if we think that if news is something that we can choose to participate in to a certain degree, not where it's overwhelming us, we can also then replace that time when we're not consuming news constantly with something that is life-giving. And I think that ultimately means, don't worry, you'll get these slides. That ultimately means, though, that I think this practice of discipleship, of establishing Sabbath for ourselves in terms of how we consume media, is an act of discipleship. So, what would discipleship look like for you, perhaps, in this media-saturated age? That could be a rhetorical question. We can come back to that. You can ponder that. I think it means spending time in discernment, spending time seeking truth, being in wonder that leads us to wisdom and truth, and to holding others and holding ourselves to account as spiritual disciplines. Again, it's not always going to feel comfortable, and it might not always be easy. But I think it is a spiritual practice for us in terms of how we think about our discipleship in this way. And like any spiritual discipline, I think it leads us to more fully embody the love and compassion and justice of God. And I think if there's anything about discipleship that's going to make us uncomfortable, and talking about current events is not always a comfortable thing to do, especially depending on who it is we're talking to. So there's some calls to action, I think, for us then, if we think, looking at the toll that it has had, the negative impact, I think, looking about tools of discernment, thinking about it, that we do have a responsibility as people of faith to how we respond. I think there's some, things that we can take as actionable steps. In responding faithfully, I think there's a personal level of responsibility or a call to action for us. I think that can be setting a Sabbath for yourself in terms of how you consume whatever it is you're consuming, without doom scrolling, so they say, without continually feeding yourself on all the events of the day. Perhaps for yourself, if you are someone who gets anxious or you like to really think and processing, keep a journal. Keep a journal, write about how a particular story leaves you. You might want to know any of the emotions that perhaps it leaves you with. That's something on a personal level. I think there's some communal things. You can do sort of what you're doing now, hosting conversations about what it looks like to be in community with one another, to think critically about this discernment without any kind of malice or ill intent. And again, as I said, as uncomfortable as it may be, part of that action is then holding one another and holding yourself to account in ways that are Christ-like in a manner you would want to be treated if someone was approaching you. I think there's a justice component to it, refusing to the best of your ability, share this information, even if it supports your side. Part of it is asking questions, being in wonder, asking those questions about what it is you see. Support as best as you can, perhaps responsible journalism that you find, even if they're not perfect, with subscriptions or advocating for the platform. And also use whatever voice you may have, whether it be social media or the people you interact with on a day-to-day basis, to amplify that message as well. And I think there's a way for us to respond spiritually as well. Whether that's grounding your day with a reminder of who you are as someone who's created in the image of God, a spiritual practice. Taking discernment as a spiritual practice itself, and to anchor yourself in how you consume everything, perhaps in a manner that's like the fruits of the Spirit. I think, what's important for us is that we do stay informed and that we are aware of things that go on, but I really do believe that we can consume too much, and that has a detrimental effect, especially if it leads us just to think, well, there's nothing I can do. Do you see the 20 different things that just happened today? What can I possibly do? And again, it's not that some of these things aren't important, but I think we have to really think critically in all these things about how do we do it responsibly, especially in our day and age. I'm going to open it up to a time of questions, but since Craig mentioned some of you preach tomorrow evening, I'm actually leading a webinar in Hudson River Presbyterian on using AI, writing sermons faithfully in an age of AI. I know some of you preach, or Craig said some of you preach at the Spring Hills. So if you're interested, it's free to attend. Get to share some AI tools that you might be interested in. Talk about some of the ethical questions about sermon writing and AI. So that's tomorrow evening if you're interested. But any kind of questions or things? I saw your hand first.
Well, first, thank you, Casey. Excellent presentation. I think a useful kind of check on ourselves is to calculate how much time we spend on our phone and our computer looking at, and then exchange those hours or minutes into everything that you mentioned in your last slide about responding faithfully and doing community outreach. And then I had a kind of chuckle to myself when we talked about facts checking, and I'm saying to myself, okay, now not only do I have to look to look at the news now, I have to do something next week. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, I just want to talk about the accountability. I loved your example of, Craig and you, and one of you posted something, I think it's a little off. The instinct is to respond publicly to everybody. That's not helpful. I think it's got to be a one-on-one conversation with your friend. And I just speak from experience with that.
Yeah, and I think that takes a lot of different shapes depending on the person, right? So I think that's something we would want to consider.
I was thinking through your presentation, I did not know who Charlie Kirk was. And I'm thinking, I need to educate myself. There's a whole thousands and thousands, particularly of young men, who are really, really responding to him. And he has said some horrible things. But there's something that draws them. And I think we need to, at least I need to know more about these other influences and figure out a way to respond as a Christian.
Yeah, I think it's hard because especially, there are topics that come up that we just don't know anything about them. And it's not because I think we're ignorant, but it's because we just can't know everything all the time. And so how we go about learning, especially, I think that's something that we balance with, the amount of time that we consume things. Like when I pull up my phone and it shows me what my screen time was for the week, sometimes I'm appalled at what it says. And then I have to think, I have to sort of tone it back, or something, I have to change what it is I'm doing.
Well, is there any TikTok influencer I should be aware of and care about?
I don't spend much time on TikTok.
I so many people. This is a TikTok influencer who is followed by so many people speaking on something I'm not particularly interested in, and I just say, I go by it, and then I figure, well, no, I don't.
It's hard because, I think in some of those TikTok things, there are credible people, like medical, there's some really great medical TikToks out there that talk about the insurance industry and stuff like that and experiences. But then there's people who, they don't have any kind of expertise in the field or any kind of journalism background, but they do have a large platform and a large following, and so they can, they say whatever. I think it's important for us to be mindful that it exists. How much you choose to consume of that, I think, is something else. Again, because as I was saying, there's a lot of young people who learned about what happened in Utah from TikTok, for example, without any kind of the best practices we try to uphold in journalism. And the only thing they saw was what TikTokers were posting. So I always try to give it a grain of, I take everything I hear from TikTok with a grain of salt.
And I think one of the scary things is, though, the number of followers in any given social media element, whether it be TikTok or Facebook or whatever, does not automatically connote authenticity. Meaning you could have a zillion followers and your first blush is, oh, well, there must be some kernel of truth in what this poster is saying. But they all could be sheep, They all could be sheep, so it's even more incumbent upon us to see where our truth is. I just had a wonderful experience yesterday. My younger son, he won't be watching this anyhow. I'm clear. He literally walks around the house with his phone in his hand. And sometimes I snarky say, gee, you might want to put that down so you don't trip down the stairs. But that being said, I took him out to St. Hubert's Giralda Farms, and we were extras in a therapy dog examination class where we were extra people and dog trainers were giving final exams to therapy dogs. Okay, that was one of the most heartwarming for me experiences to see both all these trainers and all these dogs. And lo and behold, it was heartwarming to my younger son as well, because he didn't have his phone in his hand for one blessed minute. 2-hour experience. So, you know, the kind of personal connection and warmth and relationship and, you know, unrequited love that went on during that quote-unquote exam time was just heartwarming. So there's places where we can certainly find beauty and warmth that are not on our phones.
Thank you. I think I'll just leave you with one little tidbit. Is I think we touch on a little bit, but I think if there's one takeaway, as much as it leads to you doing more work, is to be curious and to ask questions, especially as I think about the growing use of AI. As beneficial and as helpful it has been in some areas, as you saw, it can generate some pretty scary results, I think, as well. So just, again, just to be mindful and to be curious and be willing to just go that little extra bit and dig deeper also. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Casey. I have to say, I'm going to have to rewatch this because I want all the links. So we do have a recorder, but we will also take your slides and make sure to share them with everyone. And Casey's going to be giving a little elevator speech during our worship service as well. So you'll get the truncated version and everyone else will as well. Next week we have a slightly different time. We're going to be meeting at 11:15 as our speaker is going to be coming in from Zoom, and he is in California.
California.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So we're going to be kind of a different kind of medium. We're going to be looking at faith and film posters. So a very unique topic. I'm grateful to Phil for getting us speaker for this. Let's close in prayer before we head on to worship. Let's pray, friends. Gracious God, may you open up our curiosity to each other, to our community, to our world. As we learn how to be better stewards of the news and sharing all that we learn, may you be with us. And may ultimately we share your love to each other. In your name we pray.